So moving on now to hopefully a little bit less boring topics. A few crucial concepts you really need to understand about Maxwell when you start. The quality of a rendering really is measured in lack of noise, and the lack of noise is measured in sampling levels. So it starts at 0 and gradually increases. It's very important to keep in mind that a common sampling level for most renders is around sampling level 17. As a general rule, and I'm going to get into this in more detail in later lessons, but as a general rule, exterior renders where the lighting is mostly coming from all directions, that's going to render the fastest. And an interior scene where most of the lighting is going to be indirect light, that's going to render the slowest. And also, another very important thing to keep in mind is that Maxwell will stop the render when either the sampling level or the time is reached. So these are things that you specify at render time. And if there is still noise in the render, you can resume that render and set a higher sampling level. So I think it's important to stop here and show you in practice what this means. So if I go into Rhino, in this particular scene, I've just worked only in Rhino using the Maxwell Render plugin for Rhino. And here are some of the buttons you can see from the plugin. Of course, you can customize these as you want. So to demonstrate the sampling level versus time functionality, first, I'm going to increase the sampling level because I've seen many people do this. They think, okay, if I have a higher sampling level, if I set it to higher, that means I'm going to have a higher quality render. And in a way, that's true, but it's not really true in the sense that you're going to reach virtually no noise much faster than sampling level 30. But what happens if you set the sampling level so high, and I click the render button, and by the way, the plugin is smart enough to tell you that your file, your MXS file already exists, and it asks you if you want to override it or rename it. So that's good that it has that functionality, so it doesn't let you delete things without you wanting it. So it opens up Maxwell Render, the MXS exported from the plugin is loaded, and now it's starting to render. And you can see here at the top some statistics. Sampling level currently at 0. Now it's already at sampling level 1. The extra sampling, I'm going to talk about that in a later lesson. The next sampling level here, Maxwell estimates how long it's going to take until the next sampling level is reached. And here the update, it's separate from the next sampling level because after it reaches higher sampling levels, it's going to take longer and longer to reach the next sampling level, but it's going to update the main render sooner than the next sampling level is reached because you can have intermediate sampling levels. So I think that by default it updates every 10 minutes so that when you reach a sampling level that it takes it more than 10 minutes to reach, it's going to update in intermediate steps, so then you can see that without waiting maybe 30 minutes for the next sample level. So that's what this update means. So right now they're the same because it takes less than 10 minutes to reach the next sampling level. Time passed, time left. Okay, so this is a problem for many people when they see this and they think, what the hell, do I need to wait 166 hours for this little render to finish? And of course that's not true, because it's true in the sense that it's going to take this much time to reach sampling level 30, which is an extremely high sampling level. You would basically never set the sampling level so high. But the thing is that the render may be noiseless or virtually noiseless much sooner than sampling level 30. Okay, so in that case, you can just look at the render and say, okay, this is good enough. I can maybe, even if there is a little bit noise left, I can just denoise it in Photoshop or something like that. I can just stop the render. In that case, it's certainly not going to take 166 hours. I mean, you can see that even by sample level 7, it's already off to a good start and it's already 2 minutes in. So what you can do then is just simply stop the render. So here you're manually stopping the render without it necessarily having reached that sample level of 30 you set in the plugin or in Maxwell Studio. Okay, and one cool feature with the MXI file, so the Maxwell Render image format, is that you can always resume the render at any time you want, in case you decide that, well, I need to render this a little bit more because there's still some noise left. So what you can do then is just simply go up to File, open MXS. So you open this existing MXS file that the plugin exported, and you simply press render again. And Maxwell is smart enough to notice that you already have an MXI file in the same path. It says here MXI output already exists, and it asks you, do you want to resume the render or just simply restart the render? So if I click resume, now it's going to resume from sample level 7.5 and just continue rendering. So this is a really cool feature because in many cases you may have well, a client or your boss or yourself that you just need to have a fast, quick preview of renders, just to have an idea of the lighting, or the materials okay, or the material assignments okay, and so on. So then you can just set a time in your plugin or in Studio. You can set this to maybe 5 minutes. Okay, so then there's no way the render is going to reach sample level 30 or even, let's set it to 17 in 5 minutes. So then the render is going to stop after 5 minutes so that you can see that preview. So a good thing to keep in mind is that if you're looking to do preview renders, then set the time very low and set the sampling level high enough just to see those preview renders. And then when you verify that everything is okay, just simply increase the time, set the time really high, and then set it to something like your final sampling level, maybe 15, and then hit render again. Okay, so then your render continues, and now it's going to stop at sampling level 15 because it's going to reach that sampling level before 9,999 minutes are reached. So it's either the time limit or the sampling level is reached. And usually I set the sampling level a little bit less than what I think I need because, again, I can always resume a render. So there's no risk that you've lost render time because of this awesome resume feature. That's very easy to use. So just File, open MXS, you reload that MXS. Maxwell knows that the MXI file is already in the specified output folder, so then it knows to ask you if you want to resume the render. So this is why it's always very important to make sure that when you render something, you always check the MXI box so that Maxwell always saves an MXI file of your render. Because without it, it's impossible to resume the render. And by the way, just to be clear, you can also, of course, close Maxwell. You don't have to have it open in the same session, so to speak, enabled in order to resume a render. And also, you can even transfer the MXS file and the MXI file to a different computer and just put them in the same folder, and then Maxwell knows to also check if there is an MXI file in the same folder as the MXS, and it will again ask you if you want to resume the render. So, you know, you can resume the render in the same session, you can resume a render that you did 2 years ago. It doesn't matter, as long as you have both the MXS files, the MXS file and the MXI file. That's all Maxwell needs in order to resume the render. A few more important things to keep in mind about the sampling level is that you will see a big difference in noise level between early sampling levels. And you saw in the example that in the beginning at sample level 1, 2, and 3, there was a huge difference, for example, between a huge difference in noise, between sample level 3 and sample level 5, for example. But as your sample levels increase, there will be a much more subtle difference in noise levels between, say, sample level 18 to 20. So what this means is that if you can live with a little bit of noise, and I know that some people are absolutely fanatical about having zero noise in the render, and personally, I don't understand that, because you can always do a very, very subtle denoising in post, which digital photographers are already used to, in fact, so they don't complain about that. And that means that it can save you quite a bit of time if you do this instead of waiting for Maxwell to render everything completely noise-free. The thing is that the acceptable sample level really depends on the scene. So that's why some may be clean by sample level 13, others may need 20 or 22. I haven't really seen in production scenes that go much higher than that, or at least it's very, very rare. The final thing, and this relates to the difference in noise levels between early sampling levels and later sampling levels, is that each sample level takes approximately twice as long as the previous one. So that's why just look at your render and say to yourself, okay, is this noise level acceptable? Can I bring it into Photoshop or any other image editor and just use a denoiser there, just a subtle denoiser? Or should I wait until it goes from, let's say, sample level 18 to 20 to have it absolutely noise free? Because the thing is, it may have taken the render 2 hours to reach sample level 18. So in order for it to reach sample level 20, it will need 8 hours. So imagine you've saved 6 hours of render time just by running a slight denoise filter in Photoshop. So really don't be too fanatical about having your renders completely noise free. So another very important concept is you need to make sure that you're exporting to Maxwell in the correct scene scale. So for example, if you intend to render a chair that's 45 centimeters big, but you export it to Maxwell, or the plugin exported it to Maxwell in the size of the house, then many things in the render will be wrong. You'll have the wrong lighting, you have the wrong depth of field, and overall the wrong mood in your render. So one quick way, if you're unsure, to check this is to just simply open the exported MXS file in Maxwell Studio and check with a grid in the viewport if that object is actually the correct size. So let me just show you that quickly. So here I have a scene exported in MXS format from a plugin, and you can see here the grid. And first of all, it's also telling you now the grid 1 centimeter. This means the distance between, I hope you can see these, but these little squares here. So each of these little squares represents 1 centimeter. So keep that in mind, that it's not the bright lines in the grid, but the slightly more darker lines here. So then I know right away that if I look at this is 5 centimeters, 10, 15, and then I know that, okay, this is the correct scale. And if for some reason your grid looks like this, so if you have absolute grid turned off, so I went into preferences, viewport rendering, and I unchecked absolute grid. So maybe by default your grid is going to look like this, which is an adaptive grid, and you can see that as I zoom in or out, the grid here changes. Okay, so this is 25 centimeters, one small grid line, and so on. So you may prefer to work like this, but personally I always like to keep the grid to an absolute grid. And here with the spacing, so you can specify the spacing between each of these little squares, what that should be, centimeters, millimeters, how many total lines you want the grid to be made up of, and the major line frequency, how many centimeters in this case should there be between each of these bright lines here. So for example, if I set this to 10, then I'm going to have a grid which has 10 centimeters between these bright lines in the grid here. Okay, and one other small tip to check the scale of your objects very quickly is to just import one of the default primitives that are included in the install, for example, a cube. And by default, all those primitives are at the size of 1 meter. So if I import that, I can tell that, okay, this 1 meter cube is quite bigger than this camera, so probably the camera is at the correct scale. Another very important thing to keep in mind is that you need to make sure that the brightness of your main color in your material is not set to higher than 225 to 235 RGB. So this has to do with the material reflectance, meaning how much light your material will reflect back into the scene. Because if you set it to 255, then you're telling Maxwell that you want most of the light to be reflected back into the scene. So when a material receives some light, you're telling it send back almost the same amount of light that you're receiving, and that's not really what happens in real life. Some part of the light is always absorbed by the material, and it sends back much less light than it receives. So you can see here very clearly what happens if you set the main color or the reflectance 0 color. I'm going to show you where that is in the material editor. If you set it too high, so you get very a lack of contrast in your render, and also you can get more noise compared to a reflectance 0 of about 225. So keep in mind that, for example, a white piece of paper has a RGB value of about 220, 225. So you rarely need to go higher than that in your reflectance 0 color. And looking here in the material editor, this is the reflectance 0 color. So you can think of this as the material's main color. So here, if I click on the color chip and the color wheel shows up, you can see here if I'm in hue saturation value, this has a value currently of 36. So avoid to setting it to 255, no matter the hue of the color. So it matters. It's not just about completely white, but also if you have say a blue that's completely blue, set that back also a bit so it's not completely blue. And by the way, this is why I prefer to work in hue saturation value instead of RGB, because here I have a separate control of just the value. So with RGB it's a little bit more complicated. If I have this blue and I want to tone it down a bit, I have to basically move here the little circle here, and that may not be so precise. So with hue saturation value, the value is decoupled from the hue and the saturation. So really, I recommend that you always work in HSV in the color wheel. And by the way, the reflectance 90 doesn't matter the brightness of it. You can set it to fully 255. It doesn't matter. Only the reflectance 0 value you need to take care of. And by the way, keep in mind also that the reflectance 0 brightness also matters if you load a texture. So instead of opening the color picker, if I click here on the texture picker and I load a texture, for some reason I load a completely white texture, but you can hover your mouse over parts of the texture and you can see the RGB readout here. So if it shows very bright, then you can use the brightness or the contrast settings to lower the brightness of that to make it within normal values. So something like that. And by the way, you can click this icon here to make the texture preview bigger or smaller. Just to mention briefly a list of links where you can get further help and training. So the official tech support and sales support can be reached by portalnextlimit.com. So once you log in there, you have two forums, one to contact sales and the other to contact tech support. So just please make sure that you use the right one. So for example, if you haven't received your license key yet, you should use the sales support forum, not the tech support forum. The next very useful link is the official forum. So I strongly suggest that you register an account there. Because that will also give you access to any betas that are going to be released. So Next Limit releases betas only to registered users or licensed users. And when you register with the forum, they will only give you posting permission if you also have a license. And there are really lots of talented users there that will jump in and help you if you have a problem. So really, it's a very useful link, and it's a pretty active forum. Of course, there's the official documentation, which is very extensive, and there are also some videos there and animations that help you understand a few concepts. There is also the experts area on the official site. So these are people from all over the world which you can contact in case you want some in-house training or one-to-one training via Skype, etc. And these people have all been certified by Next Limit to be very knowledgeable Maxwell users. And of course, there's maxwellzone.com, the site you're on right now. So just to mention briefly that this is the first of a series of tutorials I plan to do for Maxwell Render. For example, I plan to do also a series on how to create your own HDR maps to use in your renders, and also a very deep look at subsurface scattering materials in Maxwell Render, because I know that's an area where people have, even experienced users, have a lot of question marks.